you doing?
What? I'm doing okay. How you doing, babe? How are you? That's how you're
Wait,
doing.
it's very funny because when we recorded, 3 episodes ago, I had bronchitis and I still have bronchitis. I'm on my
You
second
know,
dose of antibiotics and steroids. I just went to acupuncture this morning. I'm drinking tea. It's definitely better, but I'm
yes.
also on an inhaler every 3 hours. Like I got this shit bad.
And something's going around.
So, I mean, it does sound like everyone sort of has something like this.
Yes.
My doctor was like, you probably had COVID in September and this is like your aftermath, but she's like, who would have known? Who
Who
would
would
have
have
thunk
thought?
it?
Who would have thunk
But we
it?
did this. We moved our offices. People know we had talked this a while. We did 55 hours over 4 days, and I was on steroids for all of it. And the sweat's coming off of my body. Steroids fuck you up.
And let us
Oh,
just say, like,
prednisone. Woo.
even without you being sick, like 55, it was 55 hours and 3.5 days. Like
Yeah.
we were nonstop. So I slept at Emily's because I don't have a home right now. So I slept at Emily's for 4 nights, which was lovely. Her daughter woke me up every morning and came in bed and cuddled with me, which was really sweet. Showed her pictures of my cat. And then we would get up immediately, go to the office, make this move, and get home around what, like 9?
I would say we were in the office for 13 hours a day every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about it. We said we have never, I don't think there has been a time in the business where we've experienced something that difficult.
No. I mean, because it was also just physical labor. Like I was like saying, like I watched this thing on Reddit, shockingly. Everyone knows my love for Reddit. And it
All
was
she's
like,
got. It's all she's got.
and it was like professional powerlifters versus like people that do like rock climbing. It was saying how like real world strength outweighs like always like mid and gym strength, which like you would think is the same. But I will tell
Right.
you this: someone who I work out 5 to 6 days a week. Moving for 3 fucking days, and my body was in so much pain.
It hurts so bad. We have bruises. I have bruises all over my legs.
Your legs were fucked. My back was hurting. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like the manual labor.
It was really funny. We were sitting down after 3 days of being so exhausted, and we were like, wait a second. Originally we had just planned to like build a practice for the two of them, the two of us. And then we were like, I think maybe we took it a little too far. Did we take this a step too far? Because I can't make Emily laugh because she's gonna have a coughing attack.
Well, it's funny because also that was the same. All right, so we had this moment where like maybe we should have just like fucking shut this shit down. Like maybe we should close shop, just have it be the two of us. It was like, and then we walk out of the building and there's this guy who's very clearly hitting on Jen. Okay. Very clearly hitting on Jen. He's like, this is your new building. Oh, you guys are new there. And Jen was like, oh no, we actually used to be up the street. We moved like 500 feet down the street, right?
Yeah.
Just into this custom building we made. And this guy's like, whatever. He's like talking to her and he's like, well, where'd you move from? Who's taking that space? Blah, blah. And then he like says something about like wanting to buy the building. And Jen, and I'm walking to like lock this back door. I'm outside. And Jen's like, oh, I'll give you the guy's number. And she walks into the building with this fucking stranger. And I am always like so hyper alert about like, where you go at night with different people. And usually I'd be like, whoa, Jen, like, wait, like I'll come in or like, and you know what? I was just like in my head, I was like, man, well, there she goes.
There she goes. Let me tell you, there was no part of me that would even think that guy was hitting on me because of how we looked by the end of day 3. Like there wasn't even a single
I was going to
part
let you
of
go.
me.
I was like, well, I guess
I know.
this is it for her.
While I was walking in, I was like, I don't know if this is a good idea, but like, I'm just so tired that I had no ability.
Did he ask for your phone number?
No.
Oh, he didn't.
Then
you sent him. Didn't you send him a phone number?
Yeah.
So
that probably wasn't the best move. Yeah.
So he has your phone number.
I sent him a contact. Yeah. Just trying to be friendly. We're opening up a new office. I'm so naive.
I know. I'm sure he was like a fine guy. I mean, he didn't kill you that night, at least. But like, I literally like
that night,
I turned around and I was like, oh, well, there she goes. Like,
there she goes. God bless. but we made it through, right?
And
We
we're
made it through
and it goes on theme with today's episode that we're going to talk about, which is hyper independence with both, which we both have an issue with.
majorly. But before we
Yes.
get there, we have an intro question.
Yes.
Your best piece of marriage advice. I'm about to get married from Jess.
Best piece of marriage advice. Okay. Nothing has to be solved in the moment. Sleep on it. Always. We always
Yeah.
say. Um, I would say this. Whatever feels as big as it does in that moment, put yourself in timeout and see if it feels that way later. I would
Yeah.
think that like marriage can feel so intense at times. You can get so mad at each other and you're spending so much time together, but you are working together on the same team. And it should be you and your partner versus the problem, not you versus your partner.
Beautiful. That mine was similar in the sense of to understand that your relationship goes through phases and to not get too caught in like a down phase
Yeah.
and attribute what you're going through in that moment to the rest of your relationship. And I think that also connects to this other piece of advice that I want to say is like, don't believe all the bullshit everyone tells you about marriage, right? Like to debunk all the myths of like, if it's right, it's supposed to be easy. Like, no, this
Yeah.
shit's hard. It is hard to live with someone. It's hard for both of you to go through your stress at the same time and try to work through it together. So just to understand that like it's a moment in time
Yeah.
and don't to not attribute it to the rest of the relationship, which is really easy to do, and to know how to pull yourself out and
Mhm.
get yourself to the next phase.
All right.
All right, that's it. That was our
Okay.
intro.
Hyper independence. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about hyperindependence. So the reason we wanted to do this episode is because we made a reel recently about hyperindependence. And it got a lot of traction. Everyone was writing and saying, "This is me." And the reason why we made that to begin with is because it's also us, right? Feels very relatable. But first, let me give you a quick definition of what hyperindependence is. So, hyperindependence refers to an extreme desire to handle everything on your own without requiring or accepting external help or support. It's often linked with various emotional or attachment styles and is typically a result from one's early life experiences. So, the reel that we created basically said if, for all of our hyper independent women, I think it was, um, underneath it is a child that needed more support growing up. So we talk about this a lot and how it develops from early childhood experiences because you might have needed more support in certain areas of your life that your parents or caregivers were unable to give to you. And so as children, we learn ways of surviving by saying, oh, I'm just going to figure this out on my own, or I'm going to do this on my own. And we develop this way of being really independent. And not only do we develop that, but we are often praised for it too, where oftentimes people say, wow, like she's so independent. He's so independent. Like they did that on their own. It's amazing that they're able to like tackle that. And so there is a lot of praise that comes from being very independent
Mhm.
growing up. So there's a nice mixture of, well, there's certain things that I probably needed more support in. And when I developed this very specific survival mechanism to be able to function in my life, people praised me for it and it became embedded in my identity, right? It's something that I feel really good about. It's something I feel really proud about. Um, and so, when we talk about hyper independence, we're talking about the extreme. It is important. We actually have a whole episode on taking alone time and like how to be alone. So being independent is an important quality and a really helpful quality to have. It's when it moves to the extreme, like anything else, that we want to look at it and say, is this actually helping me in the ways that it once helped me as a child? Is it still serving me in the ways it was once serving me? Or are there things that I could change? Are there people that I could ask for help? Are there ways that I could do things differently so that I'm not so burnt out, not so overwhelmed, so that I feel like I can have more support as an adult?
Mhm.
in ways that you didn't receive as a child.
Mm.
So I think we get into some questions.
Perfect.
Someone said, not a question, but I'm so excited for this topic because it's so me to a major fault. Love that.
Well, so I guess the question is asked is like, there's a question on here somewhere about like, well, is this bad? What if I like it? Right. And so like we're not saying anything is bad. We've had this conversation a million times on here. When we talk about the stuff is when does it get in the way of things?
Yes.
Right. So let's say that you're hyper independent, but you're also resenting people around you for not helping. Well, then that's going to work against you, right? Or you're hyper independent, but that you're making a lot of mistakes and not getting assistance. Or hyper independent and you're burnt out from all that you're doing, right? So like, is it becoming a problem in your life? This is not a bad skill to have. I teach my daughter to be independent all the time. It's amazing to be independent. In some ways, it also gives you a lot of self esteem, right? We've talked about before that like self-esteem is built from mastery. And so let's say you become Jen is like the queen of building furniture, right? Like
Right.
at the end of the day, it's annoying for you to do, but when you see all that furniture built in that office, how good do you feel?
Amazing. Let me tell
Right?
you, it doesn't feel annoying. I love it. There's
Yeah,
something about
that
it. Feels
yeah.
really
But there's
therapeutic
there's
too.
others there's other stuff that you don't like, right? So like, and that's the thing to ask yourself is like there's certain tasks that you do work for you and they feel therapeutic and they feel good. That's great. So yeah, so a lot of people want to know is why am I like this?
Yes. And there are some common factors that lead us to being hyper independent. So and a lot of them are connected to like early childhood experiences. So trauma and loss. So if you have been significantly let down or hurt, you may have adopted a hyper independent approach in order to protect yourself from further emotional pain. Another one that comes up is fear of vulnerability. So you may equate dependence or needing help with weakness, and therefore you might force yourself to be independent as a way to avoid such perceived vulnerability. Um, Conditioning and upbringing is another thing we talk about is that you may have been raised in an environment that heavily values independence, pushing you towards hyper independence. So relying on other people may have not been something that was taught to you growing up. Certain life experiences, as we're saying, so like very harsh experiences can make people feel like they cannot rely on others, reinforcing that they need to do everything on their own. Um, and self esteem and self worth. So, for some individuals, being self sufficient is a strong aspect of their identity, like we're saying, making them feel valuable or important. So, this, as we said earlier, being hyper independent, you're often praised for it. This. So, if it's become embedded into your identity and what you do, then, and it's something that gives to you, so that might be a reason why you might be holding on to hyper independence. And then people had a lot of specific questions about their upbringing and,
So
you
a
know,
lot of people had asked about parentification and enmeshment with this,
yes,
right?
yes.
So
Someone
yeah.
said, could this stem from an enmeshed family or also one where perhaps a child was parentified? Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yes, period is
One,
the answer there.
yes, period, 100%. Because if you think about parentification in general, right? When you're asking a child to grow up way quicker, you're expecting them to be able to do things that maybe they aren't able to do or need more help doing,
Yeah.
right? So it is a perfect tie-in to parentification because when a child is parentified, they're
Mhm.
expected to do things that are above the age that they are developmentally at.
Yeah.
And so those children become and develop ways of surviving by becoming really independent and figuring things out on their own. And once again, it helps them to build these skills very early, which is really helpful, but also it reinforces that they can't necessarily rely on people or they can't necessarily call on their parents at a time that they really need them.
So let's talk about the balance part because quite a few people had written in about like, how do I know when I've taken independence too far or what's normal independence versus hyper independence? And a great way to define it, to think about it is in terms of this. Can you accept help at
Yes.
all?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
there's nothing wrong with being independent. It's an amazing trait to have. It's when it becomes a problem, right? So when it
Yeah.
becomes a problem is I'm too burnt out, I'm too tired, I don't let myself rest. I don't let myself ask for help. I don't let myself accept help when somebody offers it. right? That's the biggest issue you and I have, is that people will actually offer us help and we'll be
Yeah.
like, no, 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 it's fine. And
Yeah.
then we moment like, that was only 2 Thursdays ago, Jen, just to put that in perspective.
Oh my God.
And people in the office were like, well, can I help? And we kept saying no. And then finally I was like, wait,
You're like, why are we saying no?
why do we keep saying no to this? And I think part of it is like, you feel, I think one, I don't know whether it was we needed to prove that we could do it on our own or if we felt bad asking for help,
Yeah.
right? Like, what do you think it was for us in that moment that kept us saying no, no, no?
For me, I think a piece of it too is that like I really want our clinicians in a lot of ways to like be able to take care of themselves and like focus on their work and taking care of their client. And that is such a huge value of ours, that like our clinicians have the space to take care of themselves and to then be able to take care of their clients and support their clients. And I think, you and I when we were seeing clients and building the business, there was so much that we had to do in so many different ways that we were stretched so thin that if there's any part that I'm asking for help, I'm like, oh, they're going to feel that way, or they're going
Mhm.
to, I don't know if it's protective or if it's like, I don't want them to feel any.
But you keep talking about us in terms of past tense when you're like, we used to.
I know.
Are we not stretched thin now?
I know we are. We totally are. We absolutely are. So, but I'm thinking in terms of like when we did more clinical work
Yeah.
along with what
Yeah.
we're doing.
I think it's
Um,
hard because this isn't like the interesting thing about, I know we have a lot of therapists that listen to this show is that like, you know, Jen and I run a highly successful business, but at the end of the day, like we're in mental health, we're not in fucking tech. So like we're not bringing in billions of dollars, like I think like we're not, you right, like don't you, like we're not a
yeah,
technology startup that has like
I
all these VCs and funders and stuff. It's like our business does great, but like there's a limit of how much you make in mental health when you're doing it ethically.
yeah,
Now, if you want to be a real piece of shit, and there's lots of people that do that were like trying to come in and take over the mental health world just to make it about money, I'm sure you're going to make more money. Unfortunately, us, we're values based, so that's not going to happen. But I think the hard part,
unfortunately.
unfortunately, right? It's like, I mean, just the financial, but it also makes it hard because people will say, like, we'll just hire more help,
Yeah,
right? Or get more help.
yeah,
And I think that that is a tricky thing for so many clinicians, especially clinicians that are in small group practices or in private practices. There's usually not an overflow of money
yeah,
to have that or to get help
yeah.
like that. So these therapists end up taking on 1 million different roles. And in some ways, it's great because you learn all these skills, right? Like if we didn't have to do that, we wouldn't have learned all the skills that we did.
Oh yeah. I mean, the amount that we learned on the job, the amount of furniture that I could put together now, like this doesn't work out. I'm becoming a goddamn task
Yeah,
rabbit.
task rabbit. We would be great task rabbits, I think, at this point, right?
Incredible.
Like
Incredible.
we can put your 18 office building in
Yes.
55 hours, give us, and we can take care of it. It'll look
Right. Oh, we
perfect.
could do it in a second. We'll
Yes.
be dead.
Yeah, we'll be dead. Well, and so there is the thing, right? So that's when the independence goes too far. Now, let's talk about something that's just adaptive to the situation. In this exact situation Jen and I were talking about, we needed to disrupt business as little as possible. So for us to actually grind ourselves into the ground over 4 days was the better alternative than us having it be slower and steady, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
We
it
didn't.
was gonna disrupt clients, it was gonna disrupt clinicians. We had this 3-day weekend, where a lot of people weren't coming in, and it was like, "All right, this is our one opportunity to do this."
Yeah. Yeah. And we did it. You know what I think? I think we've gotten really good, at least at asking each other for help because we're a
Yes.
partnership. And, we've always said this on the podcast and to each other that like we both have different skills that we utilize and are really helpful. But I think we have gotten really good at asking each other for help or saying like, hey, I need a break. Can you take this over?
Yeah.
And like kind of feeling that out.
Yeah.
So I think it also connects to like, can you build that trust in your relationships or certain relationships to be able to ask people for help? Because if you developed um this coping mechanism of being hyper independent, one of the things you might struggle with is trusting others um, to be able to help you, or to
Mhm.
rely on others to be able to help you. And someone asked, and this goes into this next question is, how does hyper independence impact romantic and friendship relationships? And someone else said, would love to hear how this relates to trauma and also how it can affect relationships. So there's a few ways. There's more than a few ways. One of them being limited emotional intimacy. So hyper independent individuals might struggle to open up about their feelings or vulnerabilities, making it difficult to form strong emotional bonds, because on top of just asking people for help to do things, right? Or like support with things, it's also support emotionally. And we often see this in therapy where someone will come in after years and years and years and say, like, I've never talked about this, or I've never asked anyone for help, or I'm introverted. And so I deal with everything on my own. So the limited emotional intimacy is that if you don't share or ask others for help, then it might keep you really distant from people emotionally. Another way is isolation. The desire to do everything on your own can lead hyper independent people to isolate, leading to loneliness or creating distance in relationships. And I think oftentimes, if you're someone who has held things in, or don't share things with others, there might be this sense of like, no one can help me with this. I can't share this with anyone. And what we know is that vulnerability leads to connection and keeps you from feeling isolated. So that's another way that it can show up in your relationships. Lack of trust is another one that we were just talking about. So you may show reluctance to rely on others, which might be perceived by your partners or your family or your friends as lack of trust in those relationships, which once again may keep you distant. Control issues, which Emily and I definitely struggle with. When I was
No.
control issues. So, like when you're hyper independent, it might manifest itself as a need for control, causing tension or conflict in your relationships. Misunderstanding or resentment, like Emily said earlier, if a person is unable to express their needs or accept help, can lead to misunderstandings or resentment from people in their life, ultimately damaging relationships. So,
Mm.
if you're listening to this and you're hearing some of this in your relationships, you might be able to see the symptoms before you can recognize the hyper independence. And so if you're hearing like, oh, some of this does come up in my relationships, might be a good question to ask yourself, like, do I really trust my partner to help me in certain situations? Is that coming from something deeper for me? Is that actually coming from our relationship? Um, or control issues, right? Do I need the sink cleaned in a very specific way? So I'm not going to ask for help from someone else because I don't believe that they're going to do it the way I want, right? Like, so how are the control issues coming out too? So it might manifest itself for everyone in a bunch of different ways. And the question is the independence that you are holding onto so strongly, is it helping you? Is it serving you? Or is it hurting you? And is it hurting your relationships? And is it keeping you burnt out and separate from others?
Quite a few people had asked about birth order stuff of
Yeah.
oldest child versus only child. And I had I wanted to touch on it because I think that there's something very interesting to this. And I know a few people had asked about also being the only daughter. We've had this question a few times. So I saw a great line, a great little saying online, which I wish I knew who said this originally. Like it was one of those things where like, who
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
fuck is the source? You'll never know.
Right. Right.
And it said, firstborns, which would also relate to only children, grow up with their parents, while later borns are raised by their parents. And I think for a lot of people, sometimes, and I'm sure that goes for many families, if not just the oldest, but a lot of us are growing up with our parents at the same time.
Yeah. Wow.
And that is going to make things very difficult. Now, some people, and this is why you'll also have like sibling relationships, or somebody had written in, how to not resent others who were given help when they grew up. Right. And so some people are raised by their parents and some people grow up with their parents.
Yeah.
And those are two very different experiences.
I'm wondering for this person, like where that resentment comes out. Like, is it a jealousy? Is it an envy that comes out? Where you see that, maybe friends had more support than you did. Maybe a sibling had more support. I think that's probably one of the hardest that we're talking about is that, like,
Sibling.
when you see a sibling had more support because you're being raised by the same, I'm using quotes if you're not watching YouTube,
Quote
you're being
unquote.
raised by the same, parents or caregivers. Um, and so I think that that can be really hard. But the thing that we always talk about is how you may grow up in the same family, but your experiences can be completely different based on the place that your caregivers are in at the time that you are developing. So, if at a time in which you were younger, your parents were going through something more stressful or experiencing something more stressful, maybe they were unable to give you the support that your sibling got at the same developmental age. And that can be really hard to experience. And also, as you grow up, you may have completely different relationships with your caregivers. And, it might keep you distant or disconnected from your sibling because of the differences that you experienced in your childhood.
Yeah. Um, so a few people talked about being a child of divorce.
Yeah.
For those of us, especially people that had high conflict divorce and their parents could not co-parent together, you probably had to learn to be very independent. And even in small ways, if I have to remember to bring my backpack back and forth or my toothbrush back and forth or different stuff like that, those are skills most children don't have to learn.
Yeah.
And this also goes for children of immigrants as well, or first generation folks that are, doing things like translating for their parents.
Yes. Yes. Oh, so many questions. People had a million questions for this one, which I love.
I, can I
Um,
can I go back to a relationship question really
yeah,
fast?
please,
Because someone
please.
had talked about what to do if your partner underfunctions. So for
Yeah.
some of us, you have learned over functioning and hyper independence in childhood, right? And you've developed a skill. And here's the thing about this skill is it actually makes you perfectly set up to go with somebody who is less independent and less self-sufficient, or what we talk about as an overfunctioner, underfunctioner. The reason it goes so well is one, you get to be needed. And most people that are hyper independent actually fucking like get off on being needed, right? How much do you love being needed, Jen?
Love it until I don't.
Until you don't. And then you're mad,
Yeah.
right? And then you're mad and then you're resentful. And here's the other stuff. But for at the beginning, it always feels really good to be needed. And it feels good because you have these skills to be like, oh man, it's really overwhelming for you to you're moving your house. It's hard for you to pack up your house. Well, let me come over. I'll bring the boxes and I'll fucking do this shit. And it feels amazing and I feel great. And once again, I usually get a lot of positive reinforcement. Oh my God, you saved me. You helped me. I would never have gone through this move if it wasn't for you. Um, and that typically works out. Now, it becomes problematic when you enter into a committed relationship or if it's completely one sided. So let's say you're in a friendship where you're always the one who is doing all the planning, who is doing all the functioning, who does all stuff. Let's say you're the one in your relationship who plans, who sets the room up, who builds the furniture, right, Jen? Who does who does the taxes, does the money, does the cleaning, any of these things. It usually works for a while until it doesn't.
Mhm.
And when it doesn't, what do you do? Do you
Yeah.
rage? Do you run? Do you freeze? Do you find yourself, I'm just no longer attracted to them and talk myself out of the relationship? There's a lot of different stuff, and everyone sort of reacts differently, but it's really important to know what do I need to do before I get to the breaking point.
Mhm. So I also want to tackle this question because I think it's so helpful for anyone's listening and who maybe identifies with being independent and it becomes part of your
Yeah.
identity, but you're also recognizing that it would be helpful to ask for help. So someone asked, so used to being an independent, I don't even realize I'm doing it. How to zoom out and work on asking for help. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to look at the times that you were the most independent as an adult and I want you to write them down, or you could put them in your phone. And so looking back at those times, I want you to ask yourself, like, are there times in which you needed more help in those situations and you didn't ask for it? And if you think about it and you can pinpoint some of those times, I want you then to say, what would it have looked like if I asked for more help? What would have changed? What would have been different? Who would I have asked? What is it that may have kept me from asking for help in those times? And that is what we often hear is like, I don't even realize that I'm doing this. I don't even realize that I could have asked for more help and I didn't. And it's something to be very conscious of, on your day to day. Like, is there anything that maybe I need help with that I'm putting all on myself? Because I think it really is common where people are saying, like, I didn't even know I could ask for help in these situations. Not even a thought that crosses my mind. And I think what often happens too is if you're someone who is really used to being independent, you start to reach out for help. If you don't get it or you get rejected or there's someone who maybe pushes you away or can't give it to you in the ways that you need it, we often turn right back into ourselves and say, well, see, I never should have
Mhm.
asked for help anyway.
Some self-fulfilling prophecy.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. So just to know that it is possible that you might start asking for help and you might get it sometimes and you might not get it other times
Mhm.
because some people are going to have the bandwidth and be able to support you and some people aren't. And some people have skills to be able to support you and some people don't. And so it's just something to move slowly in. But the thing that I wanted to say that specifically because I want to prep the people who are hyper independent who do make the jump to start reaching out to people to know that if someone's not able to be there for you, it doesn't mean that you have to crawl back into your hyper independent shell.
Mm. Mhm.
And I know that that's hard because it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to ask for help. It's
Yeah.
not easy.
I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why like postpartum was so hard for me and pregnancy was so hard is because it's like just a very vulnerable time by nature,
Yeah.
especially postpartum with a lack of sleep. And I just fucking hated it because that
Yeah.
is such a triggering feeling for me um to feel vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And like what a extremely vulnerable time,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep.
And also, when you're going through something new, sometimes you might not know what you
Yeah.
even need to ask for help, right? Like
Yeah.
when you're postpartum for the first time, did you even know what you needed or
No,
what kind
I,
of
I was very
support?
disconnected to all reality.
Right, exactly, exactly.
I didn't
So
know who I was. I didn't know English. I don't know.
right. So I think that's another thing is if you are someone who is used to being hyper independent, you might not even know what your needs are.
Yeah.
Or if you're going through something new, you might not even know the things that you need to ask for. So it's another piece of this is to get really connected to yourself during this time, to be able to understand what you need to be able to ask for your needs to be met.
We have a Dear Emma Jen we have to get to.
I'm ready.
All right.
I got it. Ready? Dear Em and Jen, first, thank you providing the world with such great knowledge. You have helped me tremendously. Second, my question is it wrong/bad that I don't want help from others? I feel really frustrated when people, family specifically, impose help on me. I know I could work on being more willing to ask for help, but I really enjoy doing things alone. It makes me feel independent, productive, successful, and gives me a sense of accomplishment. My strong sense of independence bothers my in laws because they want to help and feel needed, but it's not my job to fulfill those needs, right? Thanks for any insight.
Nope. Not your job.
Not your job,
Period. It's the easiest Dear Emma Jen we've ever done.
right? Done and done.
Here's what I would say. If it all feels good for you, that's great, baby. You don't need to
Yep,
change a thing. Just be aware that there might be a time where you need help, even from those in laws, and see what it's like to accept it then. But it is not your job to fulfill that need in any way. Maybe they want to plant you a vegetable garden, though, or some shit.
which might be nice, depending on what kind of vegetables
Yeah, true. Or how
you're
much work
into.
that you have to do. Yeah. But
Right,
no, the answer is no. There's
right.
nothing wrong with it at all. It's okay to not want help from others as long as it feels good to you and you're not left with those feelings of resentment or avoidance. That's all I would
Absolutely.
say.
I love that.
All right.
That's our episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you have a friend who's hyper independent and you think they would benefit from listening to this episode, feel free to send it on over. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and follow on Apple Podcasts. We love a 5-star review. If you are looking for a therapist, we would be happy to help support you at the therapy group. We have offices in Philadelphia and our new beautiful office in Westchester and
Pennsylvania, not New York.
Pennsylvania. Yes. And virtually all across the US. If you are wondering if we serve your state, feel free to fill out a contact form on thetherapygroup.com. As always, thank you so much for listening and for your support. We really appreciate you. And don't forget to grow yourself. You got to know yourself. We'll see you next week.